Hello, welcome back to the iESE conference 2024, out of the frying pan into the fire. And in this session, we're going to be looking at AI in public services and local politics. So we're looking at leveraging artificial intelligence to improve foresight and support the creation of vibrant and resilient communities. So just to kick off, I'm going to ask each of our speakers here today to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion. Kurtis, can I ask you to kick off, please?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Kurtis Toy. I'm the Chief Executive for the Cyber Centre of Excellence for the UK, and I'm a qualified virtual CISO, so a Chief Information Security Officer, and I specialise in helping organisations look for their cybersecurity gaps and then come up with a strategy on how to best keep themselves defended.
Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Gibbs. I'm the Executive Director for Communities for Bracknell Forest Council. Within my portfolio, I've got all of those traditional services, but I also look after our digital customer services and IT portfolio. I'm also a member of the British Computer Society, and I also I'm one of the judges of the CIO 100 competition.
And I'm Andrew Larner. I'm from iESE, and one of the things I do with iESE is help support governments around the world in their modernisation. And one of the areas of common development at the moment is the use of AI in delivery of those public services. So just to kick off, let's perhaps reflect on what we actually mean by AI, particularly in the context of public services, and maybe what are some of the kind of perceived pros and cons before we dive into that further. Kurtis, can I ask you to sort of kick off and give us a little bit of an intro, and then if you've got anything to add, Kevin, I'll ask you to come in after that.
Certainly. So with AI, it's become a bit of a buzzword that's been used, I'd say, mostly this year. Previous to ChatGPT taking off, most of the things that we're now calling AI were just previously defined as machine learning or as some kind of algorithm that we had in place. So AI has definitely become a buzzword because it doesn't technically exist yet. Nothing has passed the Turing test. Nothing is technically completely artificial. It's all just very clever algorithms that are pulling things in. So with ChatGPT as an example, it's generative pre-trained transformer. That's what the GPT means. The most important part of that is the T, the transformer, the last part. Basically, when you put in a prompt into ChatGPT, every word that you put in is then being cross-checked and cross-examined with every other word that you put in. And that's then what makes it come up with the more iterative responses from it. And the main difference between that and a kind of chatbot, which is canned responses. So it's effectively Google on steroids, and then it's able to put it back into a language that you're able to understand and put across. So now when we talk about AI in public services, we're also talking about using the same kind of concept, that advanced thinking and the advanced machine learning that can learn as it's progressing, to be able to give us more efficient times in research or in work that we're doing, or able to summarize the content of an email or a report, for example. So that's what we're kind of broadly talking about is the automation of some of the things that we would typically have done manually beforehand.
So it's definitely artificial, but we're not quite sure how intelligent it is yet.
Exactly. We're not very good at defining intelligence across physical species, let alone digital yet. So it's not quite the same. So
right. It's presumably come a long way already. It's not. It's in many decades ago when I did my PhD, when I was part of a group, one of the PhD students there was working on AI, and this is many decades ago. And I think they classified it as it's like a plastic flower. It looks great from a distance. In terms of that practical description you've given, how intelligent is it at present? Are we finding practical uses? We don't need to go too far into it, but we'll come back to that. But just to give a view about how far we've come in recent years.
Massively. Obviously, with ChatGPT taking off, lots of things have then caught up, and lots of things have been fast-tracked and now being at the forefront because it is something that's been desired so much. So the kind of pros of that are that things are advancing all the time, and that the models are becoming more and more sophisticated and clever. I'd say there's a bit of an art form with using it. So in the same way that you could Google 10 reasons that the Earth is flat, and you will find 10 reasons that the Earth is flat. By doing
If only.
it needs to become. You need to be just careful that you're not using it to create your own echo chamber. So it's still looking at it. There's no way for it to completely fact check other than being able to rely on resources that are already there. There's no peer review of the output.
Yeah, and maybe we'll come back to that in terms of fact checking and also how biased or otherwise it is. But just continuing with the theme of the introduction, Kevin, anything you want to add to what Kurtis said, but also then from a practical perspective in terms of implementation within a council, what does it look like, and what does the process of implementation look like?
So I come at this as a practitioner and about how we get things practically done on the ground. I think from all of my experience of that technology journey, this is perhaps the first set of technology which senior leaders have been driving into the organisation rather than technology leaders trying to encourage decision makers to adopt. I think there's a worry within that space because, as Kurtis and yourself have said, AI has become a buzzword and it means many things to many people. And for me, it's really around three sets of technologies, I suppose. There's one which is about personal productivity, which very much is about those generative AI tools helping you to draft and craft what you're already doing. Then I think it's about those engineered tools. Certainly, some colleagues at Agilitis are doing some work around SEND health and care plans, where actually you're paying for someone to have engineered a solution so that you've got quality control, you've got a quality outcome, even though you still need to have a human at the final end. And then I think we've got robotic processing, which has been there for some time, but has been wrapped up in this badge. And I suppose my concern and worry for decision makers is where they're unclear about those different streams. I've been to too many conferences where people are sharing prompt scripts for doing stuff around planning. Now, it might be a really great prompt script, but Kurtis has made a point around that. How do you check the output? And certainly the BCS have been absolutely clear as the scandal in terms of the post office that a human needs to actually check the output. Much easier if it's helping you write a report in that personal productivity space. You do need to have that assurance when it's into that engineered space.
Yeah. There's at the County Councils Network conference over the weekend into Monday, there was some great examples and discussion of AI. And one of the examples there was exactly the one I think maybe the one you referred to, is where councils were using AI in children's services. So, they'd got the scenario was a children's social worker comes back from leave, has got a stack of new cases to progress, has already got the tail end of the ones that weren't before going on leave. How do you process them quickly? And effectively, they got a digital twin of themselves in the system, and they'd also got some learning around cases previously, and it was able to then read in the new cases and create some kind of initial report within a couple of minutes, which would have essentially saved the children's social worker a lot of time, A, increase contact time, but B, then give them a starting point. So that kind of save some money, but still keep the human in the process, was kind of very clear, and actually quite exciting that can be applied to such a under pressure frontline service. So there's, I think that's I've definitely seen that there. But the other point, I guess, and maybe we'll come on to it later, is around your point about planning. Is don't just take the existing service and throw AI at it. Is that in terms of the practical process of implementation, it doesn't assuming it doesn't take away any of that normal challenge about should you be doing the service in this way or should you be doing it at all. are there other ways of achieving this, and then apply the AI to it. It's kind of not there's a horse and cart question here, I presume, in kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, very much so. And as I said, the idea of do you get people to make stuff and then throw it into your business processes versus the engineered stuff is a real worry. As a practitioner, one of my roles really is, and I use this analogy, but it only works for people of a certain age. I'm trying to keep the Flintstones in the organisation moving forward while the Jetsons are off driving farther forward. How do I keep those two groups happy within a single organisation? But equally, how do you? One of my real worries at the moment around those digital twins, those AI twins, is if I generate, if I make myself in one of those tools while at work, that IP is owned by the council. But when I leave, is it right that the council retains the ability to make decisions that I would have made? And put that through some sort of filter. So does that then say that actually it's better for professionals to actually own their digital presence and bring it as part of their sort of tool set to the organisation, or is it generated within the organisation? And I think those conversations, along with the conversations, the ethical ones, that I think we'll come on to, which is what is the ultimate role of a local authority? Is it to be one person on their own with auto processing for every service, or is part of our role about encouraging in the dynamicism of encouraging and creating community? There's a fundamental questions that the technology, as always, is running ahead of the conversations of what is it that we see as the core of an organisation, what is the core of the role of an employee, and how does that interact in the service delivery model?
Interesting. It's very interesting. So there's a key question around the ownership of the data within the AI engines itself, especially as you're kind of helping them learn as an individual officer. I mean, so interestingly in the sports field where you've got the athletes at the top of their game, they're actually having their DNA sequenced and they're owning the rights in that for those things that are leading to performance enhancement coming out of that in the future. So that's a really interesting one where perhaps you might have a similar sort of thing emerge in this space. In terms of that then, so we've got a basic understanding of the AI and we're coming on to practical implementation. Still some, say, ethics and other related issues we'll come back to. But you're a public sector organisation, you're thinking about adoption. Leave aside some of those thornier questions at the moment. How should you progress? How should you approach the adoption and balance that innovation with the sort of job questions you've created? So are there job security questions coming out of that? But also public trust, because if the thing is fantastically making decisions quickly, or inputting to that, but the wrong ones as perceived by either the officers or public, how do you build the trust in that? Yeah.
I suppose we're again coming back to that sort of history journey. I'm old enough to remember going to senior managers and saying we should have a PC on every desk because it will make everyone really productive. And the finance director saying we can have one that sits in the corner with some special soothsayer who could go and actually access the computer. As I said, this is a technology which is being driven by, I think, senior leaders, seeing it as a way of getting very rapidly to a set of savings. But they've not gone through a process of educating themselves around the distinctions that I've made in terms of productivity. And certainly where my initial implementation approach, which was to start building use cases which is literally just, here's a good idea, and AI works in that space. But build those use cases, test them with practitioners, and then trying to roll those out. And I think having spoke to colleagues at Barnsley Council, who took the approach of, we'll just give Copilot to every member of staff. Everyone gets Copilot, and then you work out what the best use case is. So really focusing on the productivity side very quickly. I've taken a hybrid of that. So those officers who are very document heavy. So if you think of most of your traditional chief officers and their PA staff, the thing that we chuck out loads is lots of minutes, lots of documentation, writing reports, and give a professional 20 minutes and we'll do you 24 pages, where as a decision maker, as a member, you really want the crystallized what's the 4 bullet points I need to know to be able to make a good decision. So we've set up a project immediately about AI for managers, with that as a goal of, let's have that open up and play, but creating that safe space. But then in my digital team, they're actually doing the hard work of building up different use cases to be able to then say, we'll pitch those into the organisation. But as I started that journey, it became really clear for the corporate management team that an awful lot more information needed to be in that space. And certainly, along with driving and defining AI strategy for the organisation, which is currently working its way through the information governance side, but also making sure that as senior decision makers, they're on board and into a space where they can ask the right questions. Until we've got that top tier in, traditional transformation is, you need to get the senior decision makers on board before you can even have that conversation. But as we all know, that the lie is that if the chief exec agrees with it, it's easy to implement. Whereas my answer's always been, if the chief exec agrees, it simply allows you the space to have the row with the rest of the organisation. So chief officers can very easily shut things down. And certainly robotic processing, I've seen implemented, worked well with the team, and had heads of service who've said, we don't want that in our team, and has switched off the automation. So we've got that journey. Sometimes that is the Flintstones, sometimes it is the Jetsons. But actually, what we need to do is to build up that skill level within the organisation over a period of time. And that starts from the recruitment process and changing job descriptions to build in that this is a skill that we need as an organisation.
And obviously, there's the transactional end, the process end, the reports end. There's some pretty good examples you've given there. Does it filter into things like predictive analytics and trying to see what the demands are going to be in the future, that kind of thing? Is it kind of there yet?
I suppose my real worry has been, so I've been an IT professional all of my career, but in local government certainly last 20 years, and that cry out for clean our data, make sure our data is clean and nominalised, making sure that it's properly linked together. And Kurtis made the point earlier around the sort of not being able to check the system. We're in danger of having lots and lots of bad data within an organisation, and then turbocharging a set of tools over that, which then surfaces it. So my real worry at the moment is we're about to use it for subject access requests.
Yep.
And we know FOI and subject access requests, at the moment, that's a process into the organisation. It's filtered by whoever's searching for the information, what they can find, and they come back and say that's what the organisational answer is. Certainly in one of my local authorities I've worked in a number of local authorities, but one, the chief exec checked every FOI before it went out.
Yep.
Imagine now that we can search every one of your email boxes and pull that information out cleanly, and it now relies on someone to sit there and read it and say, is this right? Is this sensitive? And as much as the BCS, who I'm a member of, to insist that it should be a human who checks and confirms, if you're a junior member of staff and you're putting out a 60-page SARS request, are you just going to print and send? And that's, I think, because we've not done that hard graft of sorting out our data. So all the analytics and all the predictivity is undermined by the fact that our data is poor.
Yep. Yeah. There's an interesting example in Dubai, and it maybe comes on to some of the perhaps ethics considerations, and maybe sort of come to you on that, Kurtis. But so you've got, if you go into the police command and control system, it's actually like a lecture theatre. You've got people at the front that are tasked with rapid first responder, and actually that's by drone, because they have a 5-minute response time, and the drone will go and assess whether the person who's had an RTA actually does need an ambulance and cancel the ambulance if that's the case. Behind them actually is the future crime team. So they are they're constantly running a model that says where next week's crime is going to be committed, and they are then deploying police to those spots, and they're pretty good at it. And you'd think that actually the better they got, the worse they'd get, if you see what I mean, because the more you're preventing the crime. But actually they still maintain a more than 50-50 ratio. They're still, still above 60%. So, but that kind of throws some kind of ethical questions, doesn't it, Kurtis? So sort of, what maybe you can sort of think about from the public point of view, or from a risk point of view. Where do you see the ethical considerations in this?
So I think there's maybe two things, and it comes down to what you were talking about with the public trust as well, and being seen by the public to do it. So, for instance, everything that Kevin's just said is totally legitimate usage that you would be using it for. I think it's just making it clear to people what has been done by AI and what has been done by humans. And the same applies then to when you're looking at the ethics of looking at predicting crime, for example. So those are very good examples where things have gone correctly. There are other, sadly, much worse stories where things have gone wrong. And I think the main pinpoint is where the automated decision happens. Is it an automated decision, or is there a human coming in to make the decision based on the data that's being given? So, for example, what you've just said about the predictive crime, the difference with that compared to horror stories where, so I think it was in California, they were trying to predict crime, and they made some pretty horrible, wrongful arrests because it was based on the type of person that's going to be committing the crime, rather than basing it on a geographical location that a crime is likely to be committed.
Yep.
The key difference is that then people have been given, with the Barrett case, people have been given an arrest warning to go and arrest whoever. Whereas with the case that you just gave in Dubai, it's actually, no, we're just going to increase the human presence here so that we are keeping an eye out for something. I think the same applies then to pretty much every aspect of AI. It's the point at which you're making the decision based upon, is that decision being made automatically based on data that's being fed into it, because a lot of that data might be inadvertently biased, just based on other data that we've already got. Or are you looking at it just to be able to streamline things across to make things simpler? So I think that then comes down to how we're using it, and the key part then being transparency on just making it clear, this is what it's being used for, this is not what it's being used for.
Yeah, I mean, the danger of that example I gave is that you could go into then profiling, which then says these group of people should not be trusted, whether that be ethnically based or whatever. But the other thing, of course, it does, even that level relies on is reporting of crime. Because actually, you might be chasing down crime, a particular type of crime in a particular type of area, or actually missing other ones. So one of the other interesting things that they did, because some of the issues culturally are about safe spaces for women to report crime. Yeah. So they do have separate private areas where women can go and report any problems that they've had, and they're proving quite successful. So. It is about understanding the nature of what you might be missing in data terms as much as the processing of it, isn't it? So
I always like the analogy. Well, it's not an analogy; it's a true story from one of the previous wars where the engineers were looking at the bullet holes in planes that came back from the field. And they were looking at all the ones that had gone down, and obviously there were lots of bullets on the wings. They were like, right, well, we need to reinforce the wings. And it was the inverse that was true. They realized, well, it's because those ones are the ones that survived, not because in the other ones, it was the pilot was killed that were hit directly. So actually, you need to strengthen where the pilot is sitting because the ones with the bullets in the wings came back. The ones that didn't come back were the ones where we need to strengthen the information. And the same is true when we're looking at any kind of data set, and automating it or adding AI into the mix doesn't suddenly mean that the data originally was correct. We still need to be able to look at it and check to see, are there biases, are these outcomes that we would expect to see, is there an inversion of this that would also be equally as true that we should be looking at. And that again just comes down to making sure that it's very, very clear what you're using the data for and at which point you're making the decision. So it might just be that we've not quite got things correct yet because we haven't been using it well enough. It's still a very immature technology, although it's incredibly advanced. It might just be the point that we need to have human intervention might need to come earlier than we've currently got in some processes, at least until we have enough data that we can safely then move that timeline of human intervention further down the road.
Interesting. So we kind of got to the point where, you know, it's more than just a large plastic flower seen from a distance. It does actually do something, because actually it wouldn't be making some of these issues if it weren't doing something. We're already starting to use it in simple reports and so on, through to analytics, including within that, you know, sort of the issues around digital twin. So given that how do AI-driven tools, particularly large language models, address, or indeed fail to address, some of the current productivity issues faced by local councils? Are they able to really make a dent in it in any meaningful way? Kevin, maybe you've got some experience in that.
Well, not a lot apart from my own personal experience. And I was speaking to a friend last night, and she was just about to embark as a civil servant into this space. And because we'd come from a computer background, a programming background, actually, I said to her, I think the adoption of prompt engineering will be really, really simple for her, on the basis of it. When I'm working with ChatGPT or Copilot, I am sort of programming it. I sort of know how to ask for the different elements to come together. Yep. And I know that it's not going to be a one-shot fix, which I really do worry about, that people will go, again, a colleague said, I got it to summarise something. It was good, but it wasn't brilliant. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've just hit it once. And I'm generating a document. It might go through the wash 5 or 6 times as I bring in new bits of information or new facts. So I think what that talks to is how are we changing the workforce in terms of skill to be able to work with these sets of tools and have that different mindset. So my chief exec is really keen around rework. She sees rework as taking, if we can get as much of that rework out, with something like 30% of what we do needed to be reworked, then that in itself would be a productivity gain, but also knowing that the neurodivergent workforce are much better prompt engineers. Yep. But I know that our recruitment process is ruthless at getting out people who are neurodiverse or struggle to work in that new social construct. So we've got that real journey in terms of how do we start changing and developing our workforce, and how do we make sure that as we bring people into the workforce, they have that sets of skill, particularly this skill, which is, I don't trust the computer to give the right answer, but I'm always going to be critical and challenging. I asked Copilot a question around the number of, it was a number of MPs, it was a number of people in the House of Lords. Yep. And the number just looked, on its surface, looked wrong. And my answer back to it is, this looks wrong, could you recheck it? And it went, oh no, I'm sorry, it was wrong, here is the right number. Wow. Now, I'm not sure, because that's just my, I've got a working assumption of what the number is. And would you think as a prompt you put in and say, I think you're wrong, go back and have another go, and it go, oops, sorry. That's a mindset. That's not necessarily something I can teach. And I do worry that those who are transactional, mechanical in using the technology will find themselves generating that lack of quality, which is why I want to buy someone who will develop that tool for me in their prompts. But there'll be that new mindset, and it's not an age thing. It's really around how you see the world and how you challenge the world.
That creates quite a big challenge for the professional groups, doesn't it? Because essentially, you can see from what you said, we're going through almost generations. So the current generation, as you're implementing AI, will come with some professional knowledge, so that what comes out, they'll be able to apply a Mark One eyeball to it and go, that doesn't quite look right. Go back and check. But if we're just skilling people in AI, just if the focus is on AI tools, etc., the challenge will be, how do we get the traditional, to the extent that it's needed, and still applies, professional knowledge in, such that you can apply the Mark One eyeball, so that's an interesting one. Although I suspect for the professions, not for the IT folks. So actually, there's individual professions onboarding AI skills and knowledge is going to be really, really important, isn't it? Kurtis, in terms of obviously there's going to be a separate session on cybersecurity. I think it doesn't matter. I think we draw some of that in, create a hook for it. To what extent do you see AI tools already in that space, positively and negatively? What's happening there?
So I'd say positively, it's probably making things a bit more accessible than they were. So for instance, cybersecurity in itself is an incredibly difficult landscape to come in as a beginner and not understand kind of the ABCs of what it is that you need to be looking at. So being able to use something like a generative AI model to be able to say, tell me what the top 5 things are that I should do to improve my cybersecurity at home. That's the type of thing that is really valuable to get from it, because even if it's not entirely accurate and they might not be the most perfect top 5, they're probably going to be within the top 10, and they're probably going to be sensible things that you can do to improve your security. And it might then just give you the right nudge to be able to move forwards to say, well, I don't actually know anything about MFA, tell me more about that. It kind of makes just researching a bit more attainable for people that aren't in the space, because they can ask it in a human manner. They can have the conversation with the AI model, and the AI model can speak back and say, these are probably the areas you want to look further into. Whereas if you just look up cybersecurity top 5 into a Google search, then you're going to end up with every sponsored ad coming to the top on different things, and Gartner's top 10 products for endpoints, and the key things that an E5 license does versus a different license. It becomes very jargon heavy very, very quickly. Whereas ChatGPT can help to remove that a little bit and just give you the kind of, well, these are the starting points and the ABCs. The other part is echoing back from what Kevin was saying about having and what you said about having the expert in the room to kind of have that Mark One eyeball on it. It's that is great for coming in as a novice and a junior for it. But if I were to ask it to write an essay on all of the reasons that ChatGPT shouldn't be used in the workforce, it's going to start to give me the information that I've asked for. It doesn't necessarily mean that information is correct or actually useful. That's where you have the trained experts and consultants then needing to be able to look at it to say, exactly as Kevin did, hang on, that's wrong. That doesn't look right. Let me correct the statement and the part that I'm putting in for you to give me the correct response to in the right data. I think it's one of those things that it does become a bit just, it needs to have that relationship within it. The downsides are more extreme because they change when you're looking from cybersecurity. So obviously, we're not the only ones with access to it. That's the key part. So when you're looking at phishing emails, typically the advice that we've been giving for years is, if the language is wrong, the spelling isn't great, it looks like there's a sense of urgency, but it's pulling you into things, but there's a couple of typos or the thing isn't correct, then you can rule it out as a phishing email. Now you obviously have AI tools that can write that email better than I can, and so that it's pulling it out, and it's designed to trick. So even the sense of urgency might still be there, but it's disguised in another manner. So it becomes very difficult because you then need to be able to trace it. Pro side, you then have AI models that are looking at your emails coming in to then say, well, actually, this one looks like it was written by AI, so we'll remove that from the equation. So it again comes down to the point of intervention of, at what point does the email get written down and put into junk? That needs to be fed in from people being able to review it. And the same is true, not just for generative AI, but also for things like malware or ransomware that's being rewritten by AI so that it can get past the top endpoint protection responses like Microsoft Defender or other areas. So not just zero-day attacks, as in the first time it comes online, but also now adapting it so it becomes an adaptive point And then you need security that also has that adaptive element, so you end up with it kind of arguing with itself to determine it. So that's the kind of the downside, is that it's not only people using it for productivity and for good, as is the case of everything we've ever done in human nature. So it's just the next evolution of this.
So we've got some positives and negatives coming through, and we're experiencing them already. On everything that you've both said, but we've talked about the fact that you can learn to do things quickly and wrongly. So what are the governance and data security considerations that we should be thinking through? In terms of public sector leaders who won't necessarily have the skills in this space, what are the top issues around AI tools that they should have in mind?
I think the main one that I would say in general is pulling information out of AI. No problem. Be careful what you're putting in. So I wouldn't necessarily rush to put in a very specific, confidential, case sensitive or specific information into AI and say, go and improve this, etc. to do it. But it's always easier for anybody to start with a bad page than a blank page. So actually getting it as a head start to start a research journey or to pull things together is fantastic. The difficulty with putting it in is that data ownership in the same regard. So if we're looking from a GDPR point of view, we've already got a protection there from EU and UK that no decision should be made automatically. I think it's right 8 of the GDPR. This is where things start to become grey, because if something is looking through a lot of people and doing it, is that an automated decision, or is that just speeding up the likelihood for us to be able to then look at it and say, well, actually, these are the areas that we're now going to act upon? And the other part is then just the transparency, again, making it very clear, this is what it's being used for, this is not what we're using it for. The most concerning part with data ownership is ChatGPT, for instance. Who owns the data for it in the back end? Now, obviously, there are different settings you can set up to configure to be able to turn on and off memory, to have it within a closed loop, same with Copilot. The difficulty is if we were to have a state-sponsored or state issue with a company that's developed this in a larger aspect, so say there was going to be an issue with American states, are we certain that the data that we've plugged into it is not then going to be used against us later?
Yeah, so that's a fair amount there to consider, and the data and data security one is one in which councils kind of have some experience. It's not a new concern.
Yeah.
Is that something already on your radar as something of increasing concern, Kevin? Is that already there?
Yeah, and I think we're certainly, again, thinking about my journey within the local government space. I remember where the sort of code of connections first came onto the radar, and begging finance colleagues to find some money for it. It all seemed a complete waste of time of what you're spending this money on. And then we went into the information governance space, and I'm the council's senior information risk officer. Certainly that was an uphill struggle, where it's, well, why can't we just do X and that governance and security element? I suppose where I've been pushing knowledge and information management as being a core function of local authorities for some time. And that KIM space is not only about protecting of data, but also about using data. And so we have an awful lot of conversations about the protection of, and some of that isn't properly focused.
Yeah.
And we have lots of conversations about using that, and that's not properly focused. And actually what you need is a governance framework which brings those two elements together. So certainly within Bracknell Forest, I'm the senior officer responsible for our digital transformation. And so under that umbrella, we're moving forward a number of digital enhancements to the organisation, including our AI journey. But I also chair our information management group at IMG, which is the protection and the security of our information. And the Caldecott Guardian, myself, and the data protection officer, with a range of officers at the council, provide that governance. And so what we're really saying there is, under my leadership, I've got both ends of that KIM conversation, But I think it's about how organisations then restructure to make sure those structures are appropriate. Who is your records manager? Are they doing good work in terms of cleaning out your data and making sure that it's good? On your data protection side, is that linked in with your digital journey? So you just haven't got someone saying no, but actually saying, I understand what you're trying to achieve. This is how we're going to make that safe and secure. And this is how we're going to set some rules. I think it's more around the challenge of working with partners. Certainly the biggest questions we've had is the NHS data is incredibly, there's lots of rules around what we need to do to be able to connect to the NHS. And some of that, I think, is a real challenge for most organisations. But then we've seen our colleagues, and we've talked about the police, we've seen our colleagues in the police having a very singular focus, which is sometimes at odds of what we're trying to do as a local authority. So certainly if it's anonymised data and it's then bringing those data sets together to make predictions, that's absolutely fantastic. But those large language models, you can re-engineer those. It's read the internet. So actually, there's very little that we're giving it. What we're trying to do is not allow it to give a roadmap through to bring those data sets and data informations together in a way which can then create new victims. So information governance is a really, really important piece. It's about making sure that it's properly resourced within an organisation. If you think we're a very small local authority, and I've got all of those elements as new elements over the last 3 or 4 years brought into the organisation, and made the organisation recognise how important those are as we move forward into this new digitally rich environment.
Interesting. So you're kind of making that a really helpful, strong connection through you personally, but presumably also through your strategies between how you're managing and improving the quality of your data over time, along with your AI strategy. So you've got that connection between the two, which I imagine, to me, sounds absolutely essential, having been involved with implementing new systems in both children's and adult services. Some of the records there, particularly the older ones, are pretty poor, and need a lot of work. So that sounds like that sweet spot of bringing together those issues is an essential ingredient in developing AI within your organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, that understanding that those governance frameworks of the organisation, one of the things that we did very early on is federate out to make sure that within every assistant director group, there was someone who was an information lead or information champion, and not in the sense that they were just there waving the flag, but they were there bringing people up to speed, doing those initial where there's been a data breach, doing the investigation, helping out people do that double loop learning around that, bringing that information back, and then being able to federate that out. Our corporate management team once a quarter get a very detailed report on all of our risks. So although we have very few red failures, all of those where an email group's been used inappropriately, something's got out of the environment, all of those are rigorously gone through as an organisation, because we simply know that that's the way that good partnership working is not giving people's data away in a way which puts them in danger. But it's a real challenge, I think, because just things like Grammarly as a system, the security team locked that down immediately and went, well, hang on, you don't think that's an AI tool, but it is. And people are writing quite confidential reports using Grammarly, and actually we don't have no idea where that data is going in the world. So but having a ready way of dealing with the risk management of that was important to be able to enable people to keep working, but without having the ChatGPT side everyone gets. Grammarly, everyone was like, well, I'm a bit confused. It's another AI tool, and there's so many AI tools out which aren't branded. And again, decision makers aren't necessarily clear that we're putting our data into the world in a way which is not got the constraints around it that we would want if we knew where it was.
Which is a great front of mind question for senior management and members. But I mean, interesting. So you've got some policy development there, you've got some strategy development, you're taking some practical actions. When you started down that, how easy was it to find best practice, or did you have to start from scratch, or was there enough information out there to at least get you going? And if so, where did you find it?
I sort of struggle to remember when I first came up against some of these issues. So going back 20 odd years ago, I was in the CRM space, pretty much around developing and working in terms of how do we start bringing systems together. And the first argument in any CRM implementation then was, what was the base data set of the council that you'd want to use? And of course, the first one that you wanted to use was the council tax data set, which had loads and loads of protections around it. But pretty much everyone else would give you what they wanted. But actually then trying to clean and sort those data, that data out, really forced you into a conversation about some of these issues. And I suppose that's really where we lent on our academic sector. Certainly in terms of when I was doing my master's and then started doing my PhD, some of these conversations about how do you move forward with use and management of data, particularly as it's growing so quickly. So I think from practitioners, CRM practitioners, this was a sort of day one, day zero type issue. But I don't think that the resources within the public sector are as well known. If every chief executive who'd said AI to me at the last LGA conference had said information and knowledge management, then that's the conversation they should have been having, which is if Hippocratic oath, do no harm.
Yep.
Before you start opening up the doors and throwing your data out, what have you got in terms of behavioural sets to protect that data? Because what my DPO and assistant director for technology, she said, I can't write a policy about something which is developing so quickly, which if she does write it, it has to say no. So how do we empower everyone to understand where the risks are so that they are doing it in a way where they recognise if there's a new thing that is exciting, that they're running some sort of risk matrix over it, or at least they bring it to our IMG and say, look, this is really exciting. We've only got like X number of hours. We're really excited about it. And we're able to say, we've got the right heads around the table to break that down and say, here's how we manage the risk, because it's going to be about a managed risk. It isn't going to be a, no, you can't use Grammarly, because these are the tools which are enabling a larger set of people to participate in the workforce. I'm a dyslexic. If I've not been able to work in the technology space for so long, I would never, the fact that systems speak to me so I can check if the grammar's right. These tools are enabling me, but they're also opening up these new vectors of risk.
Interesting. So I mean, it's impressive, a combination of things there. Policy, practice, a knowledge of tools. Just a kind of open question that you probably weren't expecting, but if there are people in our audience out there that would like to see some of that, just to give them a head start, is that something that you'd be willing to share in terms of the?
Yeah, I suppose we're all in that space of crawling around and trying to pick up information. Certainly, colleagues pulled some information from the Northeast DAS group, who have been doing some work around bringing stuff together. And of course, what I did is taken their information, throwing it against my AI strategy, using ChatGPT to say where are the risks and where are the issues, stuff like that. Tick, 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 tick. We've got that sorted. But as I said, I'm less worried about those people who are close to some of these conversations. The management team, the senior management team, are talking to me constantly, and I fire them quite regular papers. I'm more worried about the frontline social worker who's realised that they can use ChatGPT to get one of their reports out much more quickly. It's invisible to us as an organisation, and it'll only be when something's gone horribly wrong will someone say, what were the controls were in place? And actually the controls in place were, has everyone been properly trained? Did they understand what those risks were? And did they have a way of, when they think something's gone horribly wrong, to come and tell the organisation so that we can put our arms around them and say, we will fix the problem. We're not going to blame you for the fact that something's gone horribly wrong in that space.
Yeah, very, very sensible approach. So, given all that we've said, there's a major shift happening. You've got the use of tools affecting, as you said, senior management, frontline social workers, and everybody in between. So how do you see, or do you see a kind of reshaping of the balance due to the introduction of AI between administrative tasks on one end to kind of creative, strategic activities, stroke roles at the other end? So what are the shifts that are happening?
For me, the key thing will be about alignment of strategies. So most local authorities have a raft of strategies, but I can bet you that no one's actually put those together and said, where do they all conflict with each other?
Yeah.
And certainly what we're starting to now do, and particularly if it comes across my desk, is I drag out the core council strategies and I throw it against the whatever you've decided to put in front of me, and I say these are the things where you're inconsistent with what we're trying to do as an organisation. So I think we'll see some greater alignment of those strategic documents. So I think that's a real positive. When I was at the Royal Borough of Greenwich, my chief, who wasn't John Comber, we devised a diagram of actually saying that there's two types of the organisation. There's a transactional part of the organisation, which is there's not many layers to it, and it's following a set of rules. And then you've got this other half, which is about the people who devise the rules, which has got more layers to it. And that transaction versus rule making stroke, one-off cases, looking at that and then devising the rules. I see that is the shift that local authorities will be moving more towards, because what we'll be trying to do is to say that some processes will be automated and auto-processed, but they need to be, someone needs to be able to do a quality assurance check on that, which is the point that Kurtis was making, that actually the senior manager of the future is the person who can look at 12 cases and say, that doesn't now make sense in terms of how the rule works, and change the rule. So we've got consistency of output. But I think it's a long journey, because we really need to build up that knowledge within the organisation at all levels of what's the right tool at the right time. At this point, I'm really thinking about AI for managers, and then thinking about those engineered tools, which I'm then giving to wider groups of people, because I know that those tools are safe to use, and then working with those people who are driving forward into those spaces to actually say, well, show me what you're doing, but then tell me what the risks that you're opening up. And then we're at least in a position of being able to try and mitigate those going forward. But I would say we're very early days. I only really got driven and passionate about this in January. And suddenly I'm speaking to chief execs all over the place, and they're going, "Oh, that's really exciting." It's like, yeah, because I've used it and I've worked out that I've trained it to be me, and have I done myself out of a job? Because what's the skill that I bring to the authority? If it's just check and challenge in a particular way, I've trained it to do that. So what's the unique thing that I'm bringing to that, which has to be that critical and inquiring mind?
Yeah, excellent. Kurtis, anything to add on that in terms of the kind of changing balance?
Certainly from the last point, I think it's fantastic. And I think when we're looking back, like right way back to George Orwell, looking at Animal Farm, the entire point of automation was so that we can get the administrative stuff done, so we can get on with the more creative stuff that we like doing in our lives. And really what we've ended up with is the opposite. We've got ChatGPT making images, putting graphic designers out of work, and then we end up spending more time doing emails. So we need to look at the balance of this to be able to get things so that actually the benefit is not just to us being more efficient, but also actually improving our way of life, so that we've got these things in. equally concerned as Kevin said about the do you do yourself out of a job by basically just training something to be so well that you've got this digital twin of you that is now better at being you than you are because it can do it 24 hours a day and it doesn't need a huge amount of caffeine to be able to do so. It's just based on the self power. And then what happens when that person leaves the job? Do you carry on with digital Kevin just doing it because, well, actually digital Kevin knows best anyway, so ask that, because that will always then stay in that fine line point. It does need that feeding of being able to change and adapt based on the other aspects. Inversely, the opposite end is also true. Are we ending up now with AI that's being able to do such a good job that we no longer have entry-level positions at all? Because we need that aspect of the next generations of the workforce coming into play need to be able to use those tools and be informed on what they can use it for, which I think is exactly what Kevin was saying is right. The main thing for an organization to do right now is just define what you do within the tools, what you don't do within the tools. Start from there, and then it can be adjusted, but at least then you've got a playbook to go from. But for entry-level positions, we also still need to be able to have them. We still need to be able to make sure that there is something that people can do as an apprentice to coming into the organization, particularly in the public sector. If we've now just decided, well, actually, we don't need to hire graphics designers or social media managers or people that are going to write blogs or blurбs or anything because we can get ChatGPT to do it, then I'd say that that's also something that the council should be providing in the first place, is an avenue for people to be able to come in to help to keep our public sector alive and focusing on what it should be, the community.
Yeah, it's an important point. I mean, it's perhaps a common thread between both the cybersecurity industry and the government, though, is kind of, have we got the pool of talent coming through at all? Anyway, in terms of local government, we've got quite an ageing population of officers. We've got a lot of people that will retire, on block, which will potentially mean that you've got not enough people in the system if we don't attract the right talent, and the right ways of working to attract that talent. And obviously, in the cybersecurity industry, it's just generally a relatively new industry, and not many qualified professionals in it. So, are there positives there to kind of balance against the negatives that you've both
Absolutely.
or warnings that you've both described?
Well, one of the benefits would be, for instance, where you've got the people mass retiring from an organisation. If you had a digital twin of them, as long as that was again, it needs to be defined of we're going to be able to use Joe Bloggs' digital twin for the next 3 years to train the next level of managers into that position. So there's something there, and maybe that can just be fed as people off board. But it just needs to be defined into saying, this is what we're going to be able to do, and this is how long it's going to be done for. And then at this point, it stops. It's that key part of, and then that part is ended, and that part's fully retired. The digital twin is also fully retired for being able to move in. And the same for cybersecurity as well. People being able to learn and get into the field of cybersecurity, because it's quite large, they can use these kind of models to be able to start looking at the things that they should be focusing on and helping them to understand some of the jargon as you enter the field.
Yeah, and Kevin, from your perspective, presumably there's a big upside there in terms of being able to look at areas that might have a lack of professional capacity.
Yeah, and I think what, as I said, a chief exec was saying to me a couple of weeks ago that they were a disruptor. They're a disruptor into the local government space. This is a disruptive tool. And we do need to reorganise how we structure ourselves as an organisation. We are working our way through an academy model, so very much thinking about how do we make sure there are entry-level jobs. But for those people who are technical professionals, the thing that we value most is their ability to bring the next generation on. So very much thinking about how do we make sure that these tools enable the sort of the middle, those who are doing stuff, those stalwarts, to be able to be as efficient as possible, to create the capacity for those senior leaders not to be checking their work, but actually onboarding the next generation. And hopefully that gives us a soft landing in terms of people leaving, because we start seeing people go from 5 days a week in tents down to 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah. And actually the tools being part of training people for those jobs of the future, rather than simply trying to keep this business model going, which ultimately chief execs want to be much more automated. So that's going to happen. We just don't need to have those unintended consequences.
Thank you both. So, in summary, we've gone from that plastic flower to something kind of very really useful to use across the organisation. But some key takeaways. Make sure that you've got the right governance and oversight. Make sure you're thinking through the rules about how you do what you do. And drive that right into every corner of the organisation and professions, with people taking responsibility for their data. We've got to think through the not just that governance, but also the way in which we get the right skills into people and how that's going to change over time. And the more we can share experience, and of course Kevin's offered there, but if anybody in the audience wants to do likewise, the better. And we as iESE will help facilitate that. So with those words, I just want to say thank you again, Kevin and Kurtis, and thank you for those of you who've come along to listen to us today. Just goodbye and thank you.